This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, madam.
This conference will now be recorded.
Madam, good morning. Shall we start? Can you hear me, madam?
Yes. Yes,
Is
sir.
it
We can
audible?
start, sir.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it's audible. We can start.
Yeah.
We can
Oh,
start.
okay. Good morning, madam.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. Keli Basoprabhukore BCA College, Chikkodi is organizing a 10-day online faculty development program on various platforms. Today is the second session. For the second session, we are having a resource person called Dr. Shanti Natarajan. She is currently an associate professor in the Department of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at BMS Institute of Technology and Management, Bangalore. She heads research project in the field of radiogenomics, autonomous vehicle technology, and precision nutrition, focusing on developing parallel algorithms based on principles of machine learning and artificial intelligence. She has a strong experience in the field of high performance computing, reconfigurable computing, embedded design, and genome informatics. She is involved in the design and development of domain specific hardware accelerators for massive parallel multi-core cores and fine-grained reconfigurable platforms. She has received her PhD from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where she is focused on building business and technical team ramp up in Renelife, a technology startup launched in June 2016 as a faculty enterprise of the Indian Institute of Science in the area of life sciences. Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the
us.
introduction. Yeah.
Over to you.
Thank you, sir.
Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can all of you see the screen?
Yeah.
So could you please confirm whether the screen is visible? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So very warm welcome to all of you who have joined this session. Myself, Shanti Natarajan, and thank you, sir, for a very nice introduction that has been extended to me, and also for having me on board this wonderful program. So the next 1 hour, I am just going to introduce you to artificial intelligence as an assistive technology. Many of us have heard a lot about this buzzword of artificial intelligence. It is the trend everywhere. And the associated subsidiaries of the artificial intelligence paradigm, which includes machine learning as well as deep learning. So to start off with, this entire talk is not about the technicalities of AI, but about what AI is based upon, what AI as a technology is trying to deliver as an output, and what forms the fundamental principles of this entire vertical, which has taken a lot of attention and a lot of research and a lot of startups and a lot of businesses happening throughout the world to tackle so many problems. Those problems which were handled in the most conventional way are now being handled with the buzzword of AI. So now let's have a quick understanding of what encouraged those big scientists and those philosophers to think of AI as a domain vertical, which is capable of generating a lot of market space and revenue. And we also will have a look at one application which uh, will help you understand how to make use of AI from scratch till delivery. Okay, so I have titled this talk as Demystifying AI, where natural intelligence meets artificial intelligence. There is a specific meaning behind this sentence. Every principle that we derive and make use of in AI is based upon the way the human brain works. So if you can have a basic understanding of the working principles of the human brain, it is the same that you make use of in AI with a lot of limitations. Correct? So with this intro, we will move on to the session. This is what we would cover. We will see a glimpse of natural AI, which I have put as a precursor to AI. Okay, natural intelligence, a precursor to AI. The second part, we will see what is the new genesis in AI, what we have derived from natural intelligence that can be conceived and implemented with the help of the limited technologies that we have. Many of you may wonder why I say limited technology. How much ever technologically advanced we are still very limited as compared to the capabilities of your natural intelligence, and hence it is still limited for us. And the third part would see AI as an application. Uh, uh, please mute yourself. Whoever has joined, please mute yourself. Thank you. Yeah. So the third part of this talk would be based on an application, which is autonomous vehicle, which is one of the research verticals that we are working upon in our department here in my college. And we will conclude with our experiences and where we, India as a nation, stands in terms of embracing this as a technology, as a revenue generator, as the one which will enable the GDP growth. Okay, so let's move on. We will talk about the first session, which is natural intelligence, a precursor to AI. As Stephen Hawking rightly said, AI is likely to be either the best or the worst thing to happen to humanity. Why? We humans as species who evolved on this earth are the best things on the earth as far as we are concerned, and the worst things on the earth as far as the rest of the species are concerned, correct? So the same goes with AI as a technology as well. If it is used to the best of its ability, it is the best thing. And if it is used to the best of the destructive ability, it is the worst thing. So let's quickly move on to the first session. Let's look at the real meaning of AI. Let's start off with those great stalwarts who have formalized the conceptual theories of AI. It started off with John McCarthy, who is the father of AI, considered to be one of the fathers of AI. He reigned in this world from 1927 to 2011. He spread his research across 4 major universities. We all know Stanford, MIT, Dartmouth, and Princeton. Princeton is the birthplace of the mathematical fundamentals of AI. Then came Marvin Minsky, who was a student of John McCarthy. Again, you can see him spread across multiple places, Harvard, Princeton, University of Manchester, and MIT. We had Alan Neville, who parallelly started off the research on the philosophical basis of AI. And his main route was in the Carnegie Mellon University. So if you can see the time frame of these scientists and researchers, they were all from the 1927, they were, and the peak of the research was in 1950s. 1948 to 1962 was the peak of the research of AI. And then the great man, Alan Turing, who said, the day when a machine is made which can beat a human, that is when AI reaches its culmination point. What was so common among all these four researchers? Were they all mathematicians? Were they all computer scientists? Or were they all fundamental basic science researchers? No. To a great surprise, all these four people were philosophers. Their basic degree was in philosophy, and they were all studying about cognition. So what is cognition? Cognition is that aspect of the human mind which defines a steady state behavior of the human mind and the brain. So the fundamentals of artificial intelligence lies in conceiving or understanding the cognition or how a human mind works. If you can understand this and formalize the functioning of the human brain, then that would be the ultimate point of research of AI. So the basics of AI lies in understanding cognition. We will see more into this. By cognition, what do we mean? What are the 9 major pillars of cognition, and what are the 9 major pillars of AI as such, as a derived science of cognition? What is AI trying to achieve? We all try to understand our environment by interacting with the environment, correct? That means we try to gather a lot of inputs from the environment and try to come up with some conclusions as to how we will react to the environment or any situation. So it involves a lot of input processing every time, as and when the participants of the session are watching this video or hearing to my lecture, their mind is processing. It's a real-time processing that is happening. So to start with, you would want to perceive the environment. So this process is called perception. To perceive the environment, you need sensors. What are your biological sensors? You have your eyes, your ears, your mind, your skin. There are a lot of biological things that interact with your environment, taking cues and inputs from the environment. So this process is called perception. Once you have perceived these inputs, you try to process them. What are the various stages of processing? You would try to judge. What are you trying to judge? Have I been in this situation before? Correct? If yes, how do I respond? If not, how do I understand this new situation and then respond? So you have already an existing knowledge base. You try to seek input and try to see whether this input is already processed. If not, process it new and update it. Correct? That's what you're trying to do by judgment. After judgment, you try to do reasoning. Fine, you have understood the environment. Now you are trying to contemplate on how will I react to this environment. So before you react, you have an algorithmic processing happening inside your mind, in your brain, thinking, if this happens, this is how I will react. If I react like this, subsequently something else happens, this is how I will react. So you have a plan of action for every situation that you belong to. So that process is called reasoning, making that plan of action. What happens after next? If you can form a sequential steps of action based on your previous experience and the new experience, that process is reasoning. Through the reasoning, you also do something. You are learning, correct? So if the situation is new to the existing set of situations that you have already faced, then you are learning something new, or you are trying to adapt yourself to the new environment. So during the learning process, you apply whatever logical reasoning you have done so far to equip yourself to the new situation. So that process is called learning. And once you have learned, you will try to have a qualitative analysis. Okay, if I do this, this is my gain. So this qualitative, quantitative, and qualitative analysis together will help you say, okay, this method is the most apt method of reacting to this particular situation that I am in. So this much of input processing goes in every situation, every second, every microsecond. The human brain is going to go through these 5 stages: perception, judgment, reasoning, learning, evaluation. After you do all this, what do? You have to update your database. Yes, this is a new situation. I have done so much of processing. Now let me remember this and update my database so that next time when I come back to the same situation, I don't have to redo this all again. Let me just quickly remember that. Correct? You don't cycle for a long time. But then after say 6 months or say 1 year, you get onto your cycle. Do you forget the rules of cycling? No, because your brain already remembers what are the rules of cycling and what is
Yeah,
Sir, can you hear me?
yeah, madam.
Hello?
Now it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Now it is audible.
Okay, so till this slide, it was all audible?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Great. So now let's move to the next slide. We have seen the 5 stages of how the natural intelligence tries to understand the environment and reacts to it. This is exactly that we're going to model in AI as well. Any AI solution will have all these 5 components. Okay. Now, what are the basic delivery options for this cognitive abstractions? Once again, my system, I think the system is hanging for a while. Just a second. Okay, we are back. So the 5 stages of this learning and reaction to the environment can be quantified as 9 different attributes of intelligence, whether it is natural or artificial. The first one is attention. So the attention span that you spend for grasping an environment, whether it is you or the artificial intelligence system that you design, decides how much of data you will gather from the environment. So the larger the time, the larger the data, but the data can also have noise. So it is up to the system to decide what would be the best data that I want. Say, for example, you are in a music concert, you have people talking nearby, but then you are at the same time attending to the person who is rendering the performance, right? But if you choose, you can listen to only that performance. But if you choose, you can as well be part of the dialogues around you. So how much and where exactly your attention is decides how pure the data that you're going to gather from your environment. The second part of quantification is perception. What I have drawn there. If I am on the left side of the number, I see it as 6. But if I'm on the right side of the number, I see it as 9, correct? So if you are in the wrong angle of perception, you get the wrong data. But if you want to sense it correctly, it is up to you to decide. And it is your understanding of the problem that will decide whether the data that you get is pure, correct, or not. The third aspect is how good the memory concepts are. So if you have, say, even in your computers, you will have a structured and orderly method in which you put your memory, correct? So you have a hard disk, you have a RAM, and you have also have these caches, level 1, level 2, level 3. Why these hierarchies of memory? Hierarchy in memory allows you to compartmentalize and store data so that you can retrieve them correctly. So is how your brain is also organized. We will see that very shortly. There are different parts of your brain which performs different functionalities and different storage functionalities, which will allow you to put data in different compartments. This is exactly how you store files also, right? You don't haphazardly put all the papers in one file. You try to put files in different files for different purposes so that you can just index the file and say file number 1 belongs to monetary transactions, file 2 belongs to administrative files, correct? So this is exactly how your human brain also tries to perceive and store things. The fourth one is language. I talk in Greek and you understand in English is not possible. So you need to talk in a language and in interactions and handshaking methodologies, which is common so that information is transferred with less complexity. So the language is treated with a lot of respect. AI has a separate vertical called natural language processing. This includes sign language processing, language translation, language generation, language understanding. So there are different stages in which a language is perceived. So this language essentially need not be spoken language. It can be written language, sign language, and language in terms of expressions. There are so many ways in which you can convey idea. So any means with which you convey an idea, it can be through a picture, it can be through a movie, everything comes under the broad heading of language. So you need to have a common grammar and set of rules over which you try to express an idea and store data. So idea is a concept, and any data that comes out of that concept is an add-on to that idea. So everything, both idea and concept, needs to be stored and processed. So language is that vertical of AI which takes care of expressions of ideas. Once you have ideas and data and everything, the next you want to do is association. There may be several situations, there may be several problems or scenarios which are related to each other, and hence you would want to perform the process of association. You also associate every time, right? Because when you are driving uphill, driving uphill is a skill that you acquire every time you drive a cycle or a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler in a road which is at an elevation. So every time you don't have to rehearse this process to drive uphill. You can already associate the existing learning to the current scenario and you can start reacting. So this process is called association. What is this? This tells you there is a learning curve. Once you have the previous 6 things put in place, then you start learning. So every new situation that you encounter adds on to your knowledge base so that you don't make mistakes or deviations from the actual path to the solution and you reach it in the most optimal way. So to reach the most optimal way or to hit the bullseye, you have to make sure that there are minimal errors on the path. So the staircase, the winding staircase, leads you to the ultimate goal with the help of learning experiences. A winding staircase is always the right symbolization for choosing the right path. A linear line will not help you choose the right path. It involves lots of twists and turns so that you learn from your mistakes and then you get penalized or you get rewarded, and then at the end you reach the final goal. So in that process of reaching the final goal, you have to make decisions. So this is the art of decision making. If you see in machine learning, those of you who are familiar with machine learning, the various verticals of machine learning are so associated with the process of decision making. It's always a yes or no decision, correct? It's always based on a flow chart. It's always based on an algorithm. You keep on asking whether I'm on the right track. And every time you are on the right track, you are rewarded with some score. So the most nasal and the most oldest, or rather it's a oxymoron, it's the oldest and the newest form of machine learning is reinforcement learning. This is exactly how reinforcement learning works.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Your voice is not clear. Voice is
Can you
not
hear me
clear,
now?
ma'am. The content
Can you
is
hear
very
me now?
good.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can
yes,
you hear
yes,
me? Yes, yes. So
yes,
when
ma'am.
you make the process of decision making is always formalized in artificial intelligence as an algorithm which performs some scoring. Every time you make a correct decision, you get a positive score. You make a wrong decision, you get a negative score. So all these aspects that you form in the daily life, follow in the daily life, they are also followed in AI-based decision making as well. And then you might have several solutions for a particular problem. How do you find out which is the best solution? The best solution is the one that either maximizes your score or minimizes your penalty. So there also you have a final decision making based on the performance of various algorithms that you choose. And then finally it is judgment, correct? So even though you have the best algorithm for the particular problem, the results that you get from the environment after you apply the problem will judge whether your choice of algorithm is correct or not. Maybe theoretically your algorithm was right, but in the practical scenario, the algorithm might not be right because it doesn't just fit the environment. And if it does not, you go back and you perform all the 9 stages and you come back again. So this is a full cycle of any solution that happens in AI. Okay, so this slide is, don't get carried away with the picture that I have put here. Just like how you can represent the human brain as 4 different lobes, you have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe. It's okay if you don't know the names of these lobes, it is not necessary. The idea from here is the map of the brain that I have given here is a functional map of the brain. What it says, it doesn't say what is the structure of the brain. It just says what function it performs. The frontal lobe, for example, it performs problem solving, it understands emotions, it performs reasoning and judgment, it performs speaking, and it also performs motor activity. So you walk, every time the direction that you walk, you just climb your stairs, right? Have you ever thought how much information your brain is processing while you climb the stairs? Automatically your brain is judging what is the height of every stair, what is the width of every stair. Can I climb one, skipping one stair? Can I skip 3 stairs and run? So it calculates your height, your breathing activity, amount of blood that is being pumped to the brain. All these things will decide the speed at which you will climb the stair. But we are so agnostic to it, we just don't respect our brain so much, right? But so much of processing happens. You visually you perform these measurements, immediately you convey to the brain calculates and tells you, passes on messages to your motor neurons on the legs and say, okay, jump now, or say, okay, hold on to the railings, climb slowly, your heart is not functioning properly. Where do you get these cues? It's the brain that does that. So similar to this, any AI system is also very modular. It will have several components attached to it. These components are technically and scientifically given certain names, and these modular functionality allows the AI system to mimic the functionality of the human brain. Okay. So this is just a blown up version of the previous slide. So here, this is just to tell you that if it is a motor functionality, say that you are walking, it is just not the frontal lobe that I showed you in the previous slide that is making decisions. There are a lot of other parts in the brain which function in concurrency. There is a sequential process that you follow, that you first see, you process in the brain, you react with your leg. See, process, react. This is sequential process. At the same time, there is also a concurrent or parallel processing that is happening in your brain where multiple elements are functioning together to make a decision. So AI also follows the same pattern. You have a sequential interaction with the environment. At the same time, several elements of the AI architecture are processing parallelly so that you can make a proper decision and react to the environment. Okay. Now we move on to the second session of this presentation. We all have learned or heard at least about deep neural networks, convolutional neural networks, or rather neural networks at the basics. What are these neural networks? Neural networks are an attempt by the computer scientists or scientists and researchers to mimic the functionality of the neurons in the brain. So in the next 2 slides, we will just see what is this functionality that we are trying to mimic. We are not trying to understand the structure of the neuron. We are trying to understand what exactly is that has inspired the formation of neural networks. As we see, any brain neuron, the cells inside the brain which allow us to process all this information are neurons. Neurons have specific structures as compared to any other cell in the human body. So here you are seeing the structure of a neuron. Neuron has a basic nucleus area or the cell body, and you have a long tail kind of a structure, and then you will have the final tail end of the structure, which is called the terminal. Okay, so if you see, there are lot of these extensions which are coming out of the cell body. These are simply those parts of the neuron cell which try to gather information from its surroundings. There are so many such inputs that you collect, and then these inputs are processed at the nucleus, which is the axon hill. This process is this one small
Madam,
green color
voice is
portion.
breaking.
Sir, can you hear me now? Probably it is the network. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Is it okay, sir? Now?
Okay, madam. Okay.
Okay. So the inputs that are collected by the various hands of this neuron are processed at the center of the cell body, and they have to be transmitted
We're
out
not hearing
of
you.
the neuron to the. 1 second, sir. I will reconnect if that helps. Please stay online, sir. I'll reconnect. Is it better, sir? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Can you hear me? Is it better?
Now it is on.
Hello?
Yeah, it is clear.
It's clear? Okay. Okay. So I will just do a quick recap of this slide. So the neural networks that we all are familiar, or at least we have heard of, is trying to replicate the behavior of the human brain cell called the neuron. Okay. So this human brain cell, just for all the engineers who are out there, I'm not going into the biological processing of this. For any cell of the type of neuron, you will have several inputs x1 to xn. These inputs are collected and they are processed at the center here, and they are communicated to the next neuron through this track called myelinated sheet. Okay, so if you see, there is something called action potential, which is the basic electrical signal that is transferred in response to the inputs that are collected at the inputs of the neuron. And this action potential travels through the length of the neuron, and it gets out of the neuron at the terminal in the form of y1 to ym. So this is basically the structure. You have multiple inputs, you have multiple input processing, and you have multiple outputs as well. So let us see quickly whether there is a physical connectivity, or it is what is causing this neuron signals to transmit to the next neuron. This was one of the major findings in 2013 that won the Nobel Prize. If you see, this is the connection between two neurons. You can see there is no physical connectivity. This connectivity is a wireless connectivity. This is done with the information is passed out of one neuron inside the inputs of the other neuron with the help of neurotransmitters, which are chemicals which respond to the potential or the signal that was traveling down the length of the neuron. So it is this neural communication that we are also trying to mimic in the neural networks part of AI. And while we have these neural networks, how these neural networks actually function. So the neural networks work with the help of a set of neurons. So how many neurons is the most optimal? How do you decide how many neurons will I have in my design? 100 neurons are sufficient? 1000 neurons are sufficient? No, it's not the number of neurons that decide. It's the amount of learning or amount of communication that these neurons enable as a system that decides how much of neurons is good for a solution from my end. So just like how the human brain develops, you can see here in this graph, in the first 19 months of a human brain development, from the time a baby is conceived in the womb of the mother, there are several curves which will describe the growth and death of these neurons. Neurons keep growing, neurons keep dying. As and when we are talking, there are several neurons which make connectivity, and several of them lose connectivity and just become dormant. So some of these neurons which form strong connectivity are there to stay, and some of these neurons which are failing to make connectivity are to die. eventually. So this exactly is also happening in neural networks. If we can make an all-to-all connectivity or many-to-many connectivity in the neurons, which are capable of transferring signals from one end to the other, they are the active neurons in your neural network. And those neurons which cannot process the signals properly and cannot communicate with the rest of the neurons are the dormant neurons. So the effectiveness of your neural network depends upon the ratio between active to passive neurons. Maximizing the active neurons in your neural network would be the ultimate thing that you would want to achieve there. Okay, so another thing that these neural networks also try to emulate is neuroplasticity. What is neuroplasticity? I will go back to the same example. We all know how to drive a cycle, ride a cycle, correct? I don't touch a cycle for 16 to 20 years. Suddenly I have this opportunity to drive a cycle. Do you think your brain will stop telling you how to drive a cycle? No, you still remember that. How? Neuroplasticity is the reason. Those memories which are already formed and which are trained and which are already there as a knowledge base in your system, they will always stay there unless there is a physical damage. So how do you translate this to AI? Those connectivities which are formed by your neural networks, which by active tracks of inputs and active tracks of output, they are to stay, right? So that provides neuroplasticity to your neural networks as well. So now there are research which is going on to measure the neuroplasticity of your artificial neural networks. So all the concepts that you make use of in AI are actually derived from your natural intelligence concepts, how your brain works. This was just one simple example that I want to tell you. So neuroplasticity is one feature. The other feature is neurogenesis. So this is something that we have not achieved in AI. You can't think of neurogenesis unless you work with, you might have, some of you might have already heard of neuromorphic computing or brain computing and things like that. They are trying to emulate neurogenesis. What is neurogenesis? We all have heard of stem cells, right? What are stem cells? Stem cells are the cells which are already available in the umbilical cord of the baby and which is cut and which is preserved so that later you can grow organs from those cells. So likewise, the stem cells are the root cells which has the property of all the cells and all the organs in your body. You can preserve and you can grow them. So all neurons are also forming from this common stem cell. Stem cells have a common property, and from there on, they fork off to form new cells of different categories. Some of them are heart cells, some become lungs of the cells of the lungs, etc. So how do you translate neurogenesis to artificial neural networks? Can I have a single circuitry which can morph itself or which can become a circuitry for, say, oncological data processing, which can form a circuitry for genome analysis, which can form a circuitry for automatic traffic lighting? So can I have a single definition of a neuron cell or an neural network from which I can spin off multiple neural networks of different properties? This is neurogenesis. This has not actually been brought into existence. People are working on that, for which you need to develop parallel softwares and parallel hardwares. This is the current research that is going on in AI. Okay. So having seen the bridging between the natural and the artificial intelligence, let's see how the structure of an AI solution will now look like. We all are familiar what all we need. We have seen the 9 characteristics of an AI. Let's see how these characteristics are built in. So this is the components of a typical AI system. As I said, you need to have sensors. Let's start with that. What are biological sensors? Hands, eyes, our skin, everything, right? So in AI, these sensors are physical sensors which are needed for multiple applications. If you are monitoring weather data, you need temperature sensors, precipitation sensors, humidity sensors, etc. If you are running it on a vehicle, you need cameras, you need radars, lidars, you need sonars. These are all sensors. Okay, once you have these sensors allow you to understand or have attention, develop a perception of the environment, and hence perform actions, right? And you will also have drives. What are drives? Drives are those computing pathways inside an AI or those algorithms which allow you to process the information that come out of these sensors. And you also have learning mechanisms. Several algorithms are there which help you perform learning, and the whole bunch of learning algorithms are classified under the heading of machine learning as a subvertical of AI. And the deliberation mechanisms, what you see here, deliberation mechanisms are those decision making mechanisms which involve planning, problem solving, scheduling, language composition, and internal memory models. Okay, so these are the 5 mechanisms which help you make a final decision and give as an output to the environment to which this artificial intelligence system belongs to. And then you also have, so this deliberation mechanisms will have some models based on which the entire AI is going to work. What are the models? You as a person will have a personality, and that personality is defined by the amount of knowledge and the amount of memory that you can have in your system, correct? So like that, any AI system will also have a behavioral modeling and also a memory modeling. Let us not go into the details of this, but this is an overall architecture of any AI system, any complete AI system. So maybe in the part of your teaching and learning process, or maybe some of the projects that you've worked on, you might have worked on individual features of this big picture of AI system. So the current state of the art industry-based solutions all have all the components which are there that is in this slide. Okay. Now, let me just blow up the knowledge component of AI. The knowledge component of AI is something that helps you react to the system based on how much you know earlier about the environment and how much you would want to know based on the current interaction with the environment. So any knowledge component, so what you see here on the right side, don't bother about this. These are the various computational units which help you form or gain knowledge. This is something that is there in any kind of AI system, including natural language processing, or maybe the automation systems that you know about, or maybe you're developing a solution for agriculture. There also you have all these things in different formats. Okay, so knowledge is one main component of any AI system. The knowledge is distributed into 2 main verticals. One is the knowledge that you gain with the current environmental interaction, and the second is the knowledge that is already there, that is stored in your memory. And this memory is also not just represented as one unit of memory, it is a hierarchical subdivision of memory. Now we move on to the learning concepts of AI. Learning concepts of AI is broadly known as the machine learning aspect of AI. Machine learning itself is a very major subvertical. There are different types of learning. I have already interacted with my environment where I am in, and through sensors I have gotten data. So how do I understand my environment? By analyzing this data, right? So there are different verticals under machine learning. You might have heard these concepts. Many of you might have been practicing these concepts as well. So you will have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, reinforcement learning. Each of them is a major subdivision. So I can this individual, if I can talk about supervised learning, I can talk for another 2 hours, but I don't want to go into the details. Whatever be the aspect of learning that you perform in your AI system, make sure that you don't learn noise, you learn only knowledge. So there is this aspect of there is this concept of taking out noise from your data and using only what that is needed. Because if you have noise in your data, noise will introduce bias in your system. What is bias? Say you are traveling on the normal road. Okay, there is a board called take deviation. You go into the take deviation, and unless you know the geography of the place, your take deviation may be a longer deviation from the actual goal that you want to reach, correct? You may be taking a roundabout way. Instead of traveling just 40 kilometers, you might have clocked in about 140 kilometers unnecessarily. So bias is capable of pulling you out of your journey towards the goal and go into tracks which are not necessary. What are the uh, disadvantages of bias? Bias needs more computation time. Bias results in wastage of resources. Bias will decrease the performance of the system. Sometimes bias will not even give you proper output, but you also need bias. Why you need bias? Say you are dealing with medical data. Okay, so in that medical data, I have lot of data. I have data from the liver. I want to look only at brain tumors, but I have data from liver tumors. I have data from cell tumors, skin tumors. So there are some indicators in a brain tumor data which will tell me that this is exactly what you should look at. So that is useful bias. And there are some data which will tell that this data does not belong to brain at all. So that will help you filter out data. So if bias alone demands lot of attention. We can talk days and days together on bias. Lot of research is happening on eliminating and keeping bias. So one of the major problems in machine learning is bias. That itself is a major advantage also. This is just one small point I want to drive in. We will move on from machine learning, and this is the computational components of AI. That is what next we will see. So I can have a broad spectrum of all AI specific architectures, or I can go deep in and I can say that I want to attack or solve a problem using one specific form of learning, say reinforcement learning. Or I would say, I don't want only reinforcement learning. I will go deep, one level deep. I will design a specific artificial neural network for solving this problem. So there are different paths to arrive at the solution for a particular problem. It is up to the knowledge level of the designer or the engineer who is handling the problem that will decide how best the solution is. The more you learn, the better would be your solution. Okay, if you are doing neuron in artificial neural networks, it needs still a lot of computations. It needs highly complex hardware architecture in the form of supercomputing platforms, or maybe GPU platforms, or maybe high accelerated platforms. But if it is a normal machine learning, you might end up doing it on a normal system. So it is just so that's what the next slide is going to tell you. It is just not the problem in hand that decides how good a solution is. It is also the computational resources in hand that tells you how faster I can arrive at a solution. So if you just look at the computational infrastructure that you need to solve an AI problem, this is the glimpse of what all you want. You need a very high performing system for coming up with a very good solution. Then the question might arise, can't I do it on a laptop? Yes, you can do it on a laptop also. But the larger the data, the larger the computational requirements, the scale up that you have to do in terms of your hardware and software requirements also will increase. So just touching upon the hardware and the software requirement, most of the solutions that are available for solving AI problems as software architectures are open source. What we mean by open source, they are available for us to download free. There are free licensing options available. Many of the current GitHub platforms are indeed solutions for one problem or the other. There are a lot of people who have tried their hands. A lot of students are now coming up actively towards this AI as a domain. But then a request from my side as an active researcher in this area to all the faculties and all the participants is, please don't look for ready-made solutions. The GitHub repository actually has a lot of ready-made solutions. Machine learning is made up entirely of mathematics. Please understand the basic mathematics, try forming your own solutions. Once you understand the basics, it is just a matter of how you apply it. Because most of these GitHub solutions that we have currently, most of them lead us not to the right solution. So it's out of experience that I'm telling. I have also been telling my research students as well as my graduate and undergrad students not to go by the GitHub solution. Please try everything from scratch. Please try to understand the concepts. Everything is simple if you try to understand. Yes, it needs a lot of mathematical background. Give it your heart and soul. It's going to be a good element of research for you. So I would get into the last session of this talk, which is one of the areas in which I have been working. This is for autonomous vehicles. To give you a brief intro into autonomous vehicles, and here I will try to relate the solutions that we have provided with all that we have spoken about. Okay, I won't go into the details of algorithms. I won't go into the details of the architecture, but I'll tell you how you can relate to whatever you have heard so far to the solutions that I have provided here. A brief intro on autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles are those group of vehicles which allow you to a greater extent perform most of the actions of driving without any manual intervention. So the picture to the right is itself an indicator. See that man, he has worn a seat belt, he is sitting in the driving seat of a car, his hands are not on the steering wheel, and to also add on to that, this car is a moving car. So the steering wheel, the car is driving for itself. You don't need a driver to drive the car. So the first question that arises, let's see from the beginning, what is the application here? Application is self-driving cars or self-driving vehicles. Need not be cars. We can have buses, we can have cycles, autos, trucks, tractors. We can have it anywhere. So what all you need to come up with such a vehicle? The first thing is the vehicle should know how to behave in the road. Can you imagine yourself sitting in a self-driving car? Would you want to do that? Many of your answers would be no, because I don't trust technology, because it's going to play with my life. But then yes, can you come up with technology that will assure you some kind of, or a greater kind of assurance that yes, you're going to be safe with me? Then it becomes a useful technology. Not all of you fly on space vehicles, right? Astronauts are trained to fly on space vehicles. Our rockets are the best example of unmanned autonomous vehicles. Only difference is there is no human experiment there. But here, this application will talk about solutions which will involve humans. So with that introduction, let's see how we can build an AI solution for autonomous vehicles. Vehicles which are able to ferry passengers, human beings, without the intervention of human beings. What are the various stages of this solution? Autonomous technology is something that is not new to us. So it dates back to 1478. Okay, so this is the famous picture. You can see the picture to the left if the screen is visible to all of you. The picture to the left is a famous picture of Leonardo da Vinci, 1478. It says it is a self-propelled cart. You can see that there is a cart, and that cart, in the middle of the cart, there is a human. The human has spread both the legs and both the hands, and he's trying to balance within the wheel. So as and when the wheel rotates, the wheel will help the man retain his vertical position, and the wheel will move forward, transferring the man from location X to location Y. The man will not become upside down as the wheel travels, because the wheel has spokes on it, which will allow the man to stay vertical. Okay, so this was a conceptual design done by Leonardo da Vinci. So that was the first imaginative self-propelled vehicle, other than the self-propelled vehicles that we all have seen in all the mythologies of all the religions. Okay, from there to 2012. 2012 was in the current era where we live, where we have the concept of the self-driven cars, which have obtained licenses to run on the road. So now an interesting question arises. If the car is going to drive on the road without the owner or without the driver, you can imagine these Ola and Uber cars coming to your doorstep without any driver. How fantasized that idea would be, right? Who will get the license for such vehicles? The owner of the vehicle, or the vehicle itself, or the software in the vehicle, or the passenger in the vehicle? Interesting question, right? So apart from this, let me go to the other extreme. If such a vehicle enters into an accidental scenario, there is an accident on the road, who will be penalized? The owner of the vehicle will be penalized? You cannot, right? He alone cannot be penalized, because the vehicle doesn't even have a driver. There is no passenger also. The vehicle simply is on the road, it rams into somebody, causes an accident. Much possible, right? So who will be penalized? The person who developed the software for this autonomous vehicle, or the person who designed the autonomous vehicle, the hardware or the control system? So these are the various problems that are associated with this solution. Then you might ask, then why we are working on this research? Yes, we need this research. Imagine you develop autonomous tractors. You don't need, the tractors are pre-programmed to work on the field. Amidst this COVID pandemic, do you think the agricultural sector would have faced such a big problem if you had autonomous vehicles on the road, vehicles that can ferry agricultural goods from one place to another. One of the few sectors which has benefited the maximum from any kind of little bit of autonomous technology is agriculture. You can please go have a look at the history of autonomous vehicles in agriculture. There are lots and lots of solutions that have come up enabling the farmers to make their produce reach the maximum of the people, and the farmer will also grow as and when we thrive on his produce. Okay, so with that introduction, I'll just move on to the next slide. There are different types of autonomous vehicles. So when there was a lot of research that was developed in autonomous vehicles, there was a standard committee, Society of Autonomous Engineers, which came up with multiple standards that define and govern and regulate and restrict the research in autonomy. So there are 6 levels of automation. I would request all of you to pay a slight attention to this because this slide is very important. Level 0 is what we all drive now. There is absolutely no automation. The driver alone is going to perform all the tasks such as steering, braking, acceleration, slowing down, braking, so on and so forth. Okay. Level 1. Some of the new cars that we have purchased, which are there in India, have level 1 automation. So this includes some function. You might be familiar with these functions. The car is going to tell you. Let's say you're putting on your map and you are driving, right? There is a lady who is going to yell out to you, okay, take left, take right, go straight. Even though there is nothing to go straight, it will advise you to go straight, right? So that is level 1 automation. There is some amount of driver assistance that is there in level 1 automation. Level 2, you move a little forward and you say that the braking system. So what are the various operations that you need your leg to perform while you're driving a car? You want to perform a lane change, you want to brake, you want to handle the steering, and you want to behave good during a traffic jam without honking or without speeding up or without braking unnecessarily, and when you want to overtake somebody. So these are the assistances that level 2 automation will give. The person who is driving need not do it. The vehicle is going to sense it and take you forward. So level 0, level 1, and level 2 are basic automations. So level 2 to level 3, there is a significant jump. So if you see on the Indian roads, the Indian government has allowed the Indian automobile companies to import and export only those softwares and hardwares pertaining to level 3, beyond which automation is not allowed on Indian roads. The reasons are so obvious to all of us. So level 3 allows conditional automation. So you can be here you can take your hands off the steering and you can allow the vehicle up to 50 miles per hour of speed. The standard is miles per hour because it's a European and American standard. And the driver can give voice commands, okay, take a lane change. And the driver can also get out of the car and say, dear car, go and park yourself. That is automatic valet parking is there. And then during traffic jams, the driver can be rest assured that my mind and brain is going to stay sane because my car is going to do the maneuver in a traffic jam. Okay. So now moving from level 3, level 4 is a very high automation where it is eyes off. You can just lean back. You remember the picture at the beginning of the slide. You can just lean back, take a good nap. Okay, if you want. Nap is not allowed. Okay, you can actually check your mobiles. You can watch your screen. You can work on your laptop while your car is driving you to your destination. And the last level of automation is the most ultimate level of automation where you can sleep in your car while the car is driving you. On the driving seat, you can simply sleep off. That is mind off. When you sleep off, it's actually mind off. Okay. So level 5 automation is something that is not allowed in most of the countries because the standards say because of safety precautions, they have not yet given licensing authorities to allow level 5 research to start off. Research is happening, but the cars are not made to level 5. Okay, so this is just another description of how these 5 levels of autonomy are going to work with the help of various sensors. What type of sensors come in place, and what type of advanced level of sensors come into picture for advanced level of autonomy. And this is a little bit technical slide. I just want to move on. Okay, so to enable autonomous driving in your car, your current car needs to be literally modified. Modified with what? Modified with a lot of sensors. Let's have a quick look at how these sensors work. If this is your car, say for example, these shaded images that you see around the car are the range of sensors, the range to which your sensors will work. Okay, the various sensors that help you uh, perform autonomous driving in a car are divided into two categories. One is those sensors which sense the outside environment, and they are called exteroceptive sensors. Just a technical name, don't bother. The other set of sensors are proprioceptive sensors. Big name but small job. These are the sensors which are actually there in your car, which see the like your speedometer, speedometer on the car, and sensors which will tell you the wheel alignment. The sensors which work with the internal functions of the car, and the sensors which work with respect to reaction with the environment. These are the two types of sensors. Most of these sensors include lot of types of cameras. You need deep lenses, you need IR cameras, you need lidars, radars, you need color imaging RGB cameras, depth cameras, and then you also need radars, sonars, and so many such sensors which are placed across the length and breadth of the car to allow it to see the environment. See, when you are driving, you have mirrors to your left and the right and the center mirror, right? So where are the mirrors for an autonomous cars? Where are the eyes and the ears of the autonomous cars? These are the sensors which are placed throughout the body of the car. Actually, you need minimum 4 cameras, each camera, 2 on the rear and 2 on the front end. You need 4 radars, 2 on the rear, front. You need 4 sonars minimum. So these forms the sensor list of sensors for the cars. And apart from this, you also need a complete set of hardware and software stack architecture, which needs to be built up and integrated into the body of the car, which will allow the car to drive on its own on the road. So this is one of the research verticals that we are working upon. We have not built a car. We don't have all these sensors. One of the areas that we are working on is specifically in terms of lidars. What are lidars? Lidars are actually mounted on top of the cars, which gives you a 360-degree perception of the environment around the car. Okay, so lidars are particularly important because the very few algorithms have come up for understanding the lidar pictures and processing the environment around it. Lidar actually sends out light rays, and based on the reflection of the light rays from the obstacles in front of you, it can be a vehicle, it can be man, it can be a wall post, it can be a signpost, anything. Based on the reflection of the light, and there are several such light rays, you form an image of the obstacle in front of you. So currently we are working on the algorithms which allow us to process lidar images. That is where my current research is. So for following up with this research, this is the architecture that we have built. This is just the functional architecture of the system that we are working upon. We are working on a software called Carla. So Carla is an AI based software which allows us to design the hardware and software of autonomous vehicles. So this is a glimpse of the architecture that we have worked with. So you can see the list of sensors here. This is too technical. I just put it because this much goes into designing one simple module of your autonomous vehicle design. We are not working on the physical body of the car. We are working on the sensors. We are trying to work on multiple sensors, trying to fuse the data from multiple sensors and coming up with decisions for automated driving. So currently we are working on all the levels of autonomy, level 3 to level 5 specifically. You can see the list of sensors. There is data management. There is huge amount of data that is being collected by each of these sensors. There are at a minimum 100 sensors in every car. Okay, so every sensor is going to sense data in millisecond range. So in 1 second, you will have a huge amount of gigabytes of data that needs to be processed within 1 second. So if your driving continues for say 5 minutes, you can just imagine the amount of data processing. So you need a very clear software and hardware hierarchy to be built so that you make accurate decisions for driving. Okay, so this is just the data flow. I'm going to skip this slide. Okay, where exactly is autonomous vehicle? Or this is a research that we have done. So just to give you an idea where exactly it is used in industry, one of the major areas it is used is in defense. So when you have unmanned aircraft which are used in the war zones, or if you want to, so the plane that I've shown here is a passenger plane, but actual research is being done on unmanned aircrafts which are in war zones by the used by the defense. So if you cannot have a war zone created, right? To deploy and test. So what you do is you make use of AI technology to build a digital equivalent of your warplane. So this digital equivalent is called a digital twin. This digital twin will emulate anything and everything that an actual plane is going to go through in any situation. So it can emulate scenarios outside the plane. It can emulate scenarios inside the plane. It can have a design of the entire set of sensors that we talked about, the perception systems that we talked about, and the complete hardware and the software emulation. Everything can be done purely on an AI software system. Okay. So this is what you can see is a structural digital twin. You can also emulate the entire structure of the aircraft for its landing, for its takeoff, for imparting ammunition activities on the war zone, crossing the LOC. All these have been tested. Trust me, Indian Air Force is having a dedicated wing for developing digital twins for the advanced aircrafts. You can have a look at the details in the literature. Please go back, please have a look and read it. It's very interesting. Okay, so as I said, or any of these automation effort needs basically 4 elements. The first one is a data repository, data handling, data storage, data modeling, and everything. Second one is the structural model of the car or the aircraft, or the equivalent software structural model. Third one is the predictive analysis. You define scenarios and you take in sensor data, you make use of existing data, and you say, this is how the system is going to behave in case something happens. That is predictive analysis. Prescriptive analysis. Prescriptive analysis says, this is how you have to control your sensors and you have to react to the environment, a prescription of those reactions for a particular prediction of a scenario. And then finally, data visualization, where you visualize the data in the form of graphs and quantitative analysis, how your system is behaving, when the system will fail, how do you overcome these failures. So this is a very, very big picture of the entire thing that is happening. Each one of them needs a lot of effort, coordinated scientific and research and industrial effort to make this a reality. So this is a description of a blown up description of what I said. Okay, where is so these are the final concluding slides. Where are we as nation? Where is India in terms of AI, adopting AI in its industries? India has come up with a strategy deploying around 7,500 crores of money for the AI initiatives in the country. It has roped in the best of the minds and the brains from the industry as well as an academia to form a strategy plan. It has identified 4 different verticals in India till 2025. One of the 4 major verticals are industry and automation, agriculture, education, science and research. Okay, so these 4 verticals will be enjoying the benefit of this huge money that has been earmarked for development of AI as a solution in India. And the most benefiting vertical of all these would be agriculture. Already a lot of plans have been deployed by government of Karnataka in association with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the central government, to deploy various AI-based solutions and IoT-based solutions on the fields. There are about millions of farmers who are integrated into this whole effort, starting from the production in the field to distribution of the produced goods to the market. Everything is being automated. There are a lot of softwares and there are a lot of technologies and a lot of equipments which are built in place for making a precision agriculture a reality. You can look at the website of Government of Karnataka Ministry of Agriculture for further details. Fine. This is, I'll just skip this slide. Okay. Agreed. AI is a solution that everybody likes to have. AI brings in automation. AI brings in fantasy. AI brings in lot of revenue. But then what we should not miss in AI is ethics. As I said, let's take the example of a simple autonomous vehicle. An accident happens. There should be a clear guideline in place which will tell you whom to be penalized. Okay? A person who has not committed a crime should not be penalized. It's okay to leave aside a criminal, but a person who has not committed a crime should not be penalized. Apart from that, there are a lot of AI being used in medical. You need a lot of ethical practices in place, standard guidelines in place. It's easy to violate all these guidelines when you are working in technology and research, because the results are going to motivate and intoxicate you to go further, one step further. But before you take that step further, think whether it is for the good of mankind or whether it is going to be disastrous. So to curb the enthusiasm of these researchers, or to have a hold on them and to come up with uh, good results which are beneficial for the society, there are certain ethical practices and standards in place. These are guidelines which needs to be enforced. These are standards which needs to be enforced, which needs to be practiced by every single engineer or a scientist in the field, so that they work towards the betterment of mankind. To that, you have some challenges. First challenge is the monetary challenge. Every company needs to see whether or not I need AI. Yes, AI is a big technology, but do I need AI is the first question that everybody needs to answer. Uh, is adopting AI going to incur me cost or give me revenue? Please do that balance analysis and say, if at all I have a projected revenue or profit of for the next 5 years, then only adopt AI as a technology. Simply don't go behind it because it is adopted by everyone. For me, it might not simply work. Correct? If AI is so beneficial in medicine, why some doctors still prefer X-ray? Why some doctors still touch you and feel your pulse to say whether you're fine or not? Because that is knowledge gained by experience that cannot be replaced by AI. AI is just an assistive technology. It is not a replacement technology, right? Another threat of AI is it can bring down initially the amount of workforce. It can result in lot of loss of jobs. What would you do for those people who are affected by this? Would you call them as collateral damage and say, okay, some of these people are bound to lose the job if the nation has to progress? Or would you say, let me rehabilitate them and put them back on job and then only adopt AI as a technology? Right? So these are some basic ethical questions that we need to answer before even we adopt any constantly emerging technology and start investing in such technologies. Okay, so this is something that will summarize the slides. Yeah, and last but not the least, see whether anybody who is adopting AI as a technology has a vision towards it. What will I achieve 5 years down the lane? How different I will be from now? If I really feel a difference, go ahead. If not, stay where you are and grow in a different line and still be at par with those people who adopted AI 5 years down the lane. Okay. Yeah, this is exactly what I said now. So if you decide that AI is the place where I want to be, there are certain investments that needs to be done, even if it is an educational institution, or say, for example, let's talk about a university which want to adopt AI for its solutions. Make sure that technically we are equipped, enable the people, train them, bring in sufficient hardware and software infrastructure to make yourself capable of traveling that extra mile to acquire that capability. Ensure that we follow the ethical practices. Sometimes this new solutions will replace the older solutions, which will not be comfortable for those people who are so used to the older solutions. Embrace them, put a hand around their shoulders and say, walk along, let me train you, let me take you along. It's a nice journey to travel. Rather than putting them aside, take them along. And mind you, technologies can make implementations faster, but technology can never replace the human brain. So try and respect that human brain which still exists. That 1.8 kg mass that is sitting inside your skull is the prime repository where all these ideas once originated. It still is a repository of so many ideas like AI. Let us all respect that and then embrace AI as a technology. Okay. So I think with this, I will conclude this talk, and I would be happy to receive questions from the participants if they have any. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any questions from audience? Please, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box. I'll ask the madam. Don't forget to put your name also. Is there any questions? We are waiting for participants to ask the questions. Okay. I think there are no questions, ma'am.
Okay, sir. Fine.
First of all, I thank Bharti madam because madam has given a wonderful resource person. It was awesome, madam. Presentation was awesome. Slides were very useful, and there are more than 130 participants have got benefited from your presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much, madam.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all
Thank you.
participants. Thank you for staying patient for 1 hour. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Bharti ma'am, for connecting me to the wonderful audience. Thanks a lot.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.